The movie Goodfellas is considered a classic in the gangster film genre for its depiction of life inside the mob. However, upon closer examination, it's clear the film took some artistic liberties with the true story. From the characters portrayed to specific criminal activities, it's clear the film altered details compared to reality. This leads to the question, how much of Henry Hill's story, as shown in Goodfellas, actually reflects reality? Henry wasn't as charismatic as he portrayed. In Goodfellas, Henry Hill is portrayed as a charming, in-control mobster, played smoothly by Ray Liotta. In reality, Hill struggled greatly, making constant mistakes in his criminal career, unlike his composed film depiction. Accounts show Hill lacked consistent control and developed drug and alcohol addictions earlier than depicted, which was his lifestyle throughout most of his time in the mob. The movie does show him spiraling out of control towards the end, but in fact, this chaotic and mistake-prone behavior defined Hill's time associating with the mob. In short, the real Hill seemed to differ significantly in personality from the charismatic character portrayed on screen by the legendary Ray Liotta. Last names were changed for Paulie, Tommy, and Jimmy. Some of the major characters' last names in Goodfellas differed from reality. As I've already discussed in previous videos, Tommy DeVito was based on Tommy DeSimone, Paulie Cicero's real name was Paul Vario, and Jimmy Conway's true last name was Burke. Films often modify criminal figures' names legally. It's believed these names changed because of the notorious crimes. There was also speculation Jimmy Burke didn't want his real name used due to an upcoming parole hearing. While minor alterations, the changed last names did provide artistic liberties in Scorsese's character portrayals compared to the true accounts explored previously. Jimmy Conway had a son who was also involved in the Lufthansa heist. In Goodfellas, little is shown of Jimmy Conway's personal life outside of his criminal exploits. However, in reality, Jimmy Burke had a son named Frank James Burke, who grew up immersed in the mob lifestyle. Frank witnessed his father orchestrate the infamous 1978 Lufthansa heist portrayed in the film. Unlike how the movie focused solely on his father's leadership of the operation, the real Frank Burke was actually involved in the planning and execution of the robbery. Where Jimmy Conway was depicted as fully in control at the head of the criminal operation, Frank Burke struggled with following in his father's footsteps and suffered from addictions like Henry Hill. Frank had difficulties escaping the chaos of life he was born into, constantly getting in trouble both legal and otherwise. The Air France heist was planned differently. Air France was one of the major robberies in the film. Paulie's crew ends up stealing over $500,000. However, the way they achieved success required a bit more preparation than the movie showed. In the movie, the crew obtained the security keys from the vault from Robert Frenchie McMahon. McMahon actually just tipped them off in real life. What they did was steal the keys from a guard who couldn't be bribed. After a few weeks of surveillance, it was discovered that this security guard had a weakness for women. The guys got him super drunk and drove him to a motel where a lady was waiting for him. When he was distracted, they were able to lift the keys from his pants. Henry wanted out multiple times. As far back as he could remember, Henry always wanted to be a gangster. The legendary quote is true to the story, but the film is structured as if Henry was fully invested in the mob since he was 13. The real Henry actually wanted out multiple times throughout his life, though. He even joined the Air Force in 1960 to escape, but ended up back in it. Hill has gone on to say that he lived in fear almost every day of his life. He tried going legitimate by purchasing a club called The Suite, which did not work. Henry's decision to give up Jimmy and Paulie makes more sense when looking at how he actually felt most of the time. Tommy and Henry didn't grow up together. To set things up easier, the film shows that Tommy and Henry grew up together since they were teenagers after being introduced by Jimmy, eventually becoming close partners in crime. Tommy DeSimone was actually about 7 years younger and didn't meet Henry, 22 at the time, until he was 15. He pretty much worked under Henry, Jimmy, and Paulie for a long time before becoming a major player in the mafia. When first meeting Tommy, Henry said that he looked like a skinny kid who was always wearing a wise guy suit and a pencil mustache. Paulie was actually a violent and vicious person. Paulie Cicero is portrayed in the movie as an understanding father figure and mentor to Henry. He still has an intimidating presence, but only because he's the boss. In real life, Paul Vario was an extremely violent individual with a huge temper. Paul was a made man in the Lucchese crime family, allowing him to run his own crew in Brooklyn. He never hesitated to attack those who slightly wronged him. In an interview, Henry mentioned that Paulie had once beaten a female server with a baseball bat since she threatened to tell Paulie's wife about their affair. Tommy's violent side was toned down compared to real life. The movie didn't necessarily get this wrong, but they definitely toned down the real Tommy DeSimone, which is saying a lot since his character was already scary enough. Who can forget the now iconic "What do you mean I'm funny" scene? Henry admits that he was genuinely terrified of Tommy, describing him as a coked-out psychopath. Tommy was known for his temper and could go off at any moment. He would even kill people just to try out a new firearm. Henry recounted a disturbing story where they were walking down the street and, out of nowhere, Tommy decided to shoot and kill a random stranger for pure enjoyment. Billy Bat's murder was planned. One of Goodfellas' most iconic scenes shows Billy Batts confronting Tommy DeVito, ending with Tommy's famous "shine box" line. However, the film portrays this as a sudden eruption due to Tommy's ego. In reality, Batts' subsequent murder was premeditated. While the confrontation occurred, Batts was not killed immediately. During his prison time, Jimmy Burke took over Batts' loan shark business. Fearing its loss, Jimmy conspired with Tommy to ambush Batts at Henry's bar, implicating Henry too. Unlike the film's dramatic opening, Batts was actually stabbed repeatedly, according to Henry. I have an entire video dedicated to the murder of Billy Batts if you want to see it. Tommy's murder remains unsolved. In the film, Henry states that they shot Tommy in the face so his mother couldn't give him an open casket. However, Tommy's body was actually never found, and his disappearance remains unsolved to this day. The movie portrays it as revenge for Billy Batts' murder, who was a made man and deemed untouchable. This is definitely plausible since Batts was good friends with the notorious mobster John Gotti. There are multiple theories as to what could have happened. One has to do with a lover Tommy had, who may or may not have been an FBI informant and had stolen $250,000. Another much more convoluted scenario is that Tommy had attempted to sexually assault Karen while Henry was in prison. Karen then told Paul Vario, whom she was having an alleged affair with. Paul then told Gotti about Batts, as well as other stories. Upon comparing Goodfellas to real-life facts, it's evident the film took artistic liberties that reshaped perceptions. Names were changed and details omitted, altering how characters were seen. In truth, key figures like Hill, Tommy, and Paulie differed meaningfully from the film's depictions in personality and actions. While the movie immortalized this criminal world, it must be recognized as Hollywood storytelling rather than a strictly truthful documentary.